Welcome back to this deep dive. We're taking a look today at a stack of notes, all centered on Psalm 54, specifically through the commentary of Charles Spurgeon in the Treasury of David. Our focus is on this short, urgent, and incredibly potent psalm. It's an anthem of both emergency and assurance.
And this isn't just, a theoretical look at some old poetry. We're examining a very specific, a very acute spiritual moment in the life of King David.
Right, he's not just having a bad day.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He is facing immediate life or death danger on the run from King Saul. And the setting is what makes it so sharp. He sought refuge with the Ziphims, and they betrayed his exact location to his worst enemy.
So it's a picture of complete earthly abandonment, a total crisis.
Exactly.
So our mission today is really tailored for this text. We want to pull out the essential insights on how a living faith is supposed to function when every human support disappears. We're going to track the speed of David's spiritual response. How does he pivot from the anxiety of this desperate pleading to the rock-solid certainty of triumph?
And what does that pivot, that speed, teach us about divine justice and the daily practice of holiness, all viewed through a clear, theologically rigorous lens?
Yeah.
And the material gives us a perfect structure for this. We'll start by looking at the instructional context, which is right there in the Psalm's title details. A lot of us skip over.
Right. But which Spurgeon says are vital.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then we'll get into the intense desperation of that initial plea in verses 1 to 3, and we'll pause right where David does at that crucial moment of meditation, the Selah.
And after that pause,
we witness this astonishing, almost instantaneous pivot to joyful triumph and the resulting vow of praise in the second half of the psalm. Spurgeon saw this as the vigor of faith at its height.
Right, he said it's the death of anxiety and the birth of security.
That's the one. And we're going to see that spiritual process happen right here in the text.
Okay, let's unpack this title then. It's more than just a note. It's an instruction on how to approach our communication with God. The dedication is to the chief musician on Nejanoth. So we're immediately dealing with the mechanics of sacred music. Nejanoth refers to stringed instruments. Why does Spurgeon even bother with the type of instrumentation?
Well, he uses it as a springboard. He wants to discuss the spirit and the variety that are required in corporate worship. The technical detail-stringed instruments, it suggests melody, and for him, critically, it suggests variety in how sacred songs are performed.
Okay.
Spurgeon's observation is piercingly practical here. He says that monotony is often the death of congregational praise.
That's a strong statement.
It is. The idea is, if the music is always the same, the spirit of devotion can just dull over time.
So he's linking the mechanics of the music directly to the spiritual state of the person worshiping. If we're just doing the same things the same way, we risk letting our heart's participation go numb.
Exactly. He argues that since providence, the way God governs and works in our lives, is so varied, then our expression of devotion, our recording songs, should also be varied.
That makes sense.
Think about the dynamic range of David's life that we see in the Psalms. You have soaring victory, crushing defeat, deep repentance, joyful praise. To sing all of those different experiences to the same dull tune, it just diminishes the reality of what God is doing.
So the form has to facilitate the feeling and the truth. It can't deaden it.
Right. It elevates the choice of a tune from just an aesthetic decision to a matter of, spiritual health. It makes sure the outward act reflects the dynamic, often messy, internal life of faith.
And the title also includes the designation Maschil. What does that label tell us about the purpose of this psalm?
Maschil is fundamentally about teaching. It signals instruction. It means pretty clearly we are to learn and to teach by what we sing.
Okay.
So edification, the spiritual building up of the believer, has to be inseparable from psalmody. The moment we detach the song from the lesson, we reduce it to, what? Entertainment or just emotionalism. And that's not enough for Christian worship.
So David's experience of being hunted down isn't just a personal journal entry. It's classroom material.
Precisely. Spurgeon notes that the varied, often brutal life of David, the betrayals, the running, the victories, it was all for the benefit of later believers, for us. These powerful ancient hymns stay fresh and precious because they are lessons set to music. They teach us how to feel, how to pray, and how to wait when we get plunged into similar crises.
And the crisis that triggered this particular lesson was the betrayal by the Ziphims. This context is so important. David comes to their community looking for a quiet place, a sanctuary, and they sell him out.
Yeah. Spurgeon calls it an act of gross inhospitality.
What made it so bad?
It just violated the most basic moral codes of the ancient world. David was, in essence, a refugee looking for shelter in a solitary abode. Instead of giving him protection, the Ziphims actively tried to curry favor with the tyrant Saul by giving up his location.
And Spurgeon is blunt about it.
Oh, he's uncompromising. He says they are willing to shed innocent blood just to earn the graceless monarch's smile.
And that motivation, gaining the fleeting favor of a wicked ruler by committing moral treason, it tells you everything you need to know about their character.
It really does. It highlights the cheap calculation of wickedness. They prioritized a momentary political gain over the eternal principle of justice.
Which is why David's reaction is so instructive. Instead of panicking, he immediately turns to prayer. The spiritual reflex is just instant.
It is. Spurgeon stresses that David sang himself into delightful serenity, and that spiritual velocity moving from acute betrayal to a state of calm is the immediate practical result of active faith under pressure.
This action, or I guess the lack of action, from the Ziphims also gets a pretty sharp comment from some of the old commentators, like Dixon. What did he see in all this?
Dixon made this observation that the wicked are often very hardy to do an ill turn. They're glad to find an occasion for it. He saw this startling eagerness for malice that contrasts sharply with how hard it can be for the godly to rally friends for a good cause.
That's a bleak thought.
It is. Dixon summarized it by saying, "Mighty men find more friends in an evil cause than the godly find in a good cause."
That's a staggering statement about human nature and society. Wickedness organizes itself efficiently, while piety can struggle.
Right, and David, seeing this pattern, turns away from any hope of human allies and turns toward his sovereign God.
And this act of turning from human betrayal to divine refuge gives the psalm its lasting theological application. I know thinkers like Tucker and Hawker, who Spurgeon cites, really anchored Psalm 54 in the church's typological tradition.
They did.
We've talked about this connection to Christ's passion before. How does looking at David's immediate context, his betrayal, his flight, deepen our understanding of Christ?
Well, the church has historically seen David's experience here as a prophecy of the Messiah's life. David is surrounded by false friends and open foes. The Ziphims are a perfect correspondence to the betrayers and spies and religious enemies Christ faced.
Okay, I see that.
So the typological reading means that when David prays for deliverance from his oppressors, we're hearing a kind of template prayer for Christ facing his own hour of abandonment.
That's significant.
It is, because it shifts our focus. We aren't just looking for personal comfort in our own trial. We're participating in a pattern that Christ perfected. Our harassment becomes a small reflection of Christ's greater suffering. And that encourages believers to remember Christ's own exercises when they're suffering.
So the suffering is instructive on two levels. David teaches us, and David foreshadows Christ, who then teaches us. It elevates our own anxieties into something bigger.
Exactly. It's a powerful framework to carry into the actual prayer.
Okay, so now we get to the heart of the psalm, the prayer itself, starting with verse 1. David has no earthly refuge left. The Ziphims betrayed him, Saul is closing in, and he knows his only recourse is God.
He is absolutely beyond human help at this point.
And he doesn't just use generic religious language. His prayer is attribute-based. It's theologically precise. He opens with, "Save me, O God, by thy name." This is an appeal directly to God's character.
Yes. He's asking God to be himself on David's behalf in this exact moment.
And this is such a critical insight into reformed piety in times of trouble. Spurgeon explains that praying by thy name means essentially employ all thine attributes for me.
He's mobilizing the entire divine nature. He's asking that every perfection blended into the divine name, God's holiness, his justice, his faithfulness, his mercy, all of it should be actively working for his defense.
It's like he's placing a theological checkmark against the crisis. He's asking, isn't your honor pledged to protect the innocent? If I perish unjustly, what does that say about the reliability of your character as revealed in your name?
Absolutely. The divine name is the full, revealed essence of God. When we appeal to it, we're not asking for a favor based on our merit, but for an act of fidelity based on his unchanging nature. It's the strongest plea a saint can possibly make.
And then David immediately follows this appeal to character with a plea for action. And judge me by thy strength. Why strength? Why is omnipotence the judicial tool he asks for here?
Because David knew the terms of the conflict. Chandler pointed this out. Saul was resolved to end the matter by force, with a javelin, with a sword, with the sheer weight of an army.
Right.
David knew he couldn't get human legal justice, and he couldn't win a physical fight against Saul's army. So he appeals to God's omnipotence, a strength that's infinitely superior and completely unrestrained by earthly rulers.
This is a request for efficient justice. Not just morally correct justice, but justice delivered with enough might to actually carry out the sentence.
Precisely. If our cause is just, we can fearlessly commit it to God's power, knowing that his strength is not only overwhelming but also righteous. When God judges by his strength, the verdict can't be appealed, and the sentence is carried out instantly.
This desperation for non-ordinary means reminds me of what Calvin said here.
Yes, Calvin really saw the extremity of David's situation. He suggested that David was seeking salvation by God's name and strength in an emphatic sense.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning he had fled to the saints' last asylum because all the ordinary methods of deliverance had failed him. Every human means of protection, shelter, community, friends, law courts, it was all stripped away.
So he's forced to seek a miracle.
He is. He's compelled to seek a direct, immediate intervention that bypasses the natural order entirely. It's a bold prayer that accepts no limits on God's ability to act for his people.
Then we move to verse 2, where he asks for God's specific attention. Hear my prayer. Give ear to the words of my mouth. We know God hears silent prayers, but David really stresses the vocalization of his petition. Is that just about urgency?
It's partly urgency, yes, but Spurgeon argues there's a practical spiritual benefit. Vocal prayer, actually speaking the words aloud, helps the supplicant to keep their mind more fully awake. It forces your scattered thoughts and racing anxieties to gather around the stated petition. David was in so much danger that he felt he must succeed. He couldn't afford to just pray out of habit or distraction.
So it's a mechanism to ensure complete mental and emotional engagement. The danger of custom, even in prayer, is that the mind can wander while the lips are moving.
Absolutely. The need to verbalize forces focus. David understood that while all other earthly weapons against Saul were useless, prayer is always available as long as God has an open ear. It's the one defense no enemy can disarm.
With his defenses now anchored in God's attributes, David pivots in verse 3 to analyze his enemies. He calls them strangers and oppressors. Let's break down who these strangers were.
Spurgeon noted they were people to whom David had given no personal offense. They were external, and crucially, they were aliens to his God. They had no spiritual loyalty to the covenant.
So David's plea is almost, Father, these are outsiders. They have no business bothering your child.
That's the essence of it. They were driven by pure external malice without any righteous provocation.
But the source material gives us some more nuanced takes on that Hebrew term, zarim.
Yes, the term zarim is complex. While the Chaldee tradition read it as proud men, another interpretation, which I think fits the narrative better, is from scholars like Weiss. They suggest zarim means skies, from a root meaning to sift or to trace out.
Which perfectly describes the Ziphites.
Perfectly. They were actively malicious agents who meticulously searched out David's location and reported it to Saul. They weren't just random strangers, they were targeted informers.
And whatever the precise term, their intent was clear. They were oppressors, seeking his soul, his life.
Their malice was cruel and intense. Their goal was to utterly crush the good man. But the true spiritual genius of David's prayer is how he boils this cruelty down to its source in the final clause of verse 3. They have not set God before them.
This is that connection between malice and what you could call functional atheism. Let's spend some time here. What does David mean by that phrase?
David recognizes that the sin driving the Ziphims isn't necessarily philosophical atheism, claiming God doesn't exist. It's practical, functional atheism.
Living as if he doesn't exist.
Exactly, or as if he's irrelevant to human affairs. If they had regarded God's law, God's justice, or God's commitment to the innocent, they would never have betrayed David. This disregard for the covenant and for moral truth is the essential spiritual breakdown.
It's the operating principle of ungodly action. If God were real to them, their moral calculation would change.
It would have to. They wouldn't sacrifice an innocent life for a monarch's favor. And David realizes that this functional atheism lay at the very foundation of their enmity.
Which is a massive plea for David.
It's huge. If he is being hated and pursued because his enemies refuse to acknowledge God, then his persecution isn't a personal feud. It's a spiritual conflict. And that transforms his personal need into a cause related to God's own honor and sovereignty. It makes his case for divine intervention just overwhelmingly strong.
And after all this, stating the danger, anchoring his defense in God, diagnosing the spiritual rot of his enemies, the flow of the psalm is suspended by the word Selah. Spurgeon suggests David is out of breath with indignation.
And that Selah is so much more than a musical break. It's a practical instruction for devotion. Spurgeon suggests it marks a moment where the sheer sense of wrong, just, bids the musician to suspend the song for a moment. It's a command to pause and reflect on the profound truths that were just uttered.
And what's the broader spiritual instruction in that for us, for the listener?
That we are usually too much in a hurry in our devotions. Spurgeon suggests that more pauses would, as a rule, significantly improve our prayer life. Holy meditation stopping to really think about the majesty of God's attributes we just invoked, or the devastating spiritual implication of the enemy's functional atheism, it makes our words more suitable, our understanding clearer, and our emotions more fervent.
So the Selah is the bridge.
It's the bridge between desperation and certainty. It's the moment when the truth of verses 1 to 3 sinks into the heart and prepares it for the triumph that follows.
And the meditation works. The Selah allows David to transition from pleading to absolute faith with staggering speed. We see this radical, immediate shift in the exclamation that opens verse 4. Behold, God is mine helper. This isn't a future hope. It's a present, declared reality.
That word, behold, changes everything. It's an exclamation. It indicates a sudden, immediate, joyful sight of his divine champion. David moves in an instant from detailing his external crisis to declaring an internal, revealed truth that completely eclipses that crisis.
He's overwhelmed with joy.
He is. He's overwhelmed at recognizing God's active, present assistance.
It's a declaration of certainty that doesn't need external evidence. As Veneman noted, behold means he's producing a certain fact, well known, demonstrated by a new proof internal to his own soul. His faith is so clear and piercing, it sees through all the clouds of circumstance.
And this certainty immediately makes the earthly crisis irrelevant. David realizes, what matters the number or violence of our foes when each he uplifts the shield of his omnipotence to guard us?
Right. The number of Ziphims or Saul's soldiers, it just doesn't matter when the omnipotent God steps in.
No.
Yeah.
And Dixon captures this so well. There is always more joy available in God's felt presence than there is grief in felt trouble.
David then extends this recognition to his loyal, though few, allies. The Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He sees God's presence not just for himself, but for those standing with him.
And this is a crucial distinction. He uses the title Adonai here, signifying the reigning Lord, the sovereign master. The great Adonai isn't a distant ruler, but is actively present in the camp of David's few defenders.
And he was confident God was on his side.
Because David's heart was thoroughly on the Lord's side. And this confidence has a vital lesson about human help.
Which is?
Herbert highlights that human friends, loyal as they may be, are like ciphers, like zeros, until the Lord sets himself as the great unit in the front of them. God is the multiplier.
I see.
Only when God, the Adonai, is recognized as the principal unit of defense do the meager efforts of human friends gain any real, lasting value.
I also appreciate that David pauses here to acknowledge a present mercy, the upholding, even while he's pursuing a future mercy, which is the full deliverance.
It shows active, realistic gratitude. We can't be so fixated on the mercy we're still waiting for that we forget the mercies we have right now.
Yeah.
Even while being hunted, God is providing the strength and sustenance to keep David upright.
Right.
And Dixon's corollary is a necessary reminder for Christian community, such as take part with the persecuted saints, God will take part with them. It's a guarantee of divine loyalty to those who show human loyalty to God's people.
This certainty of God as helper immediately leads to the declaration of God as judge in verse 5. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies. And we need to be careful here. This isn't David just indulging in some emotional outburst of personal revenge.
No, it is entirely theological certainty. It's an acquiescence to the sentence of the just judge. David is declaring a universal moral truth appointed by God. Those who work for evil will receive their wages. Malice, especially malice aimed at the innocent, cannot go unavenged.
And Spurgeon says that if God were lenient to persecutors,
it would constitute cruelty to the good.
Yeah.
God's moral governance requires that justice be rendered.
It's the expectation that their own wickedness will inevitably recoil back on them.
Precisely. The certainty is rooted in the moral order of the cosmos that God established. The arrows of malice shot upward have to fall on the oppressors themselves. This declaration moves way beyond private emotion and becomes a statement of faith in God's sovereignty over moral consequence.
And he frames this judicial act around God's veracity. Cut them off in thy truth. What's the specific plea here about God's truth?
This is the core of the Reformed understanding of judgment. David is asking that God's veracity, His absolute truthfulness and faithfulness regarding his solemn warnings against evildoers be placed beyond dispute. God has decreed that the wicked will be cut off. David is asking that this decree be fulfilled to demonstrate the integrity of God's word. The sentence is righteous and just, so let God's word be proven true in the outcome.
So the destruction of the Ziphims wouldn't just be David's deliverance. It would be a public demonstration of God's faithfulness to his own moral covenant.
Exactly. It fulfills God's public promise to uphold justice. And the Hebrew word used for this decisive action, cut them off, tumu, has this powerful, almost chilling technical connotation that contrasts so sharply with the visible, loud warfare of Saul's javelin.
Let's get into that term, tumo. What does this silent, fatal blow signify?
Well, Benema noted that the primitive sense of tumu is to be silent, which extends to the sense of a decisive, fatal stroke. It suggests a silent, swift, and penetrating blow, a death-dealing action that strikes so deeply that there's no room for recovery or escape.
Spurgeon described it as being opposed to a sounding blow that rebounds and does not pierce.
That's it. It's internal, it's swift, and it's definitive. Human justice is loud, visible, and often ineffective. It rebounds. The Ziphims made a public show of their malice to get public favor.
But David asks for tumu.
Yes, a silent, fatal stroke from the ultimate judge. This demonstrates the spiritual nature of God's justice. It penetrates the heart and strikes at the root of the atheistic malice that drove them. It's justice that needs no fanfare, only deadly accuracy.
The declaration of God's judicial certainty then leads directly to the final movement, the joyful, required response in anticipation of rescue. David's faith is so absolute he is already fulfilling his vow, starting with the freely sacrifice.
He's acting on the deliverance before it is even physically manifested. He declares, "I will freely sacrifice unto thee." And this isn't just about the optional nature of Thanksgiving offerings. Spurgeon focuses on the alacrity and cheerfulness with which David promises to pay his vow.
So his anticipated gratitude would just load the altars with victims cheerfully presented.
Precisely. The spontaneousness of our gifts is a great element in their acceptance. The Lord loves a cheerful giver. And this cheerfulness is rooted in David's total certainty that the deliverance is a done deal, settled in the courts of heaven. His gratitude can't be contained.
It flows before the rescue, based solely on the veracity of the rescuer.
That's right. And this offering is explicitly paired with vocal praise. "I will praise thy name, O Lord." He clearly feels that no amount of sacrifice, no animal on the altar could fully express what's in his heart.
So he resolves to be constantly in vocal thanksgiving, and he returns to the name, the very term he used in his prayer in verse 1.
But here, he emphasizes the grand, covenantal, revealed name of Israel, O Jehovah. This name, which signifies God's self-existence and faithfulness to his covenant, nourishes the most acceptable praise. Those who have tried and proved the preciousness of his name in seasons of adversity are the ones who praise him best. David is ready to give that tested praise.
He also declares the goodness of the act itself. For it is good. Why state the obvious?
Well, he's contrasting his own piety with the functional atheism of his enemies. The Ziphims did not set God before them. David resolves that he will keep the Lord in perpetual remembrance. He will acknowledge the name because the name is good.
I see.
And beyond that, praising God is good not only in its object, but in its subjective effect on the worshiper. It makes us happier and holier and beneficial to those around us. It's the complete opposite of the sour, self-serving malice that drove his oppressors.
The psalm then moves to its triumphant conclusion in verse 7, which acts as both a retrospect and a prospect. For he hath delivered me out of all trouble. David sings this as if the mercy has already been received.
This is the absolute apex of faith. David draws confidence from the many past deliverances in his life, feeling that his final rescue is near. He lived a life of constant dangers, yet he was always safe.
And he knows the covenant God has committed.
Yes, pledged to bring the righteous out of all trouble. The final future deliverance is guaranteed by the past and present faithfulness of God.
It's the assurance that every current affliction is temporary, and that the faithful preserver of the covenant will ensure the righteous finish line is crossed. It's what Spurgeon beautifully captured when he spoke of that spiritual foresight that anticipates victory. Glory to thee for all the grace I have not tasted yet.
That is the essence of anticipation, and this final future certainty leads to David's ultimate confident view of his adversaries. And mine eye hath seen his desire upon mine enemies.
He anticipates standing triumphant, looking down on his haughty foes, where they once looked on him with contempt. And again, we have to clarify, this is not about private malice.
Absolutely not. This desire is an expression of what Spurgeon calls sacred acquiescence and delight in divine justice. It is the righteous soul exulting not in personal revenge, but in the righteous punishment that saves the good and overthrows the malicious.
It's delight that God's truth has been upheld and the moral order has been restored.
Yes, the terror has finally transferred from David to his enemies, and he stands completely secure.
And as we noted, the text allows for the simpler but still triumphant reading where his desire is supplied by the translators. So it can simply mean, mine eye have looked upon mine enemies, implying he was able to meet them or look at their fate without any lingering terror.
The security is everything. Whether looking directly upon them without fear or looking upon the divine execution of justice, the result is the same. David's faith has proven sufficient to overcome physical danger and spiritual anxiety.
This deep dive into Psalm 54, guided by Spurgeon's exposition, has shown us a masterclass in spiritual velocity. We tracked David's response, seeing how his faith moved so quickly from the immediate crisis of betrayal to a confident, active declaration of God's sovereign defense. The critical gear shift was abandoning any reliance on human help and appealing directly to God's name and strength, asking him to act consistently with his perfect nature.
And David's experience serves as a clear instruction. When we're faced with abandonment or betrayal or feel as friendless as he was, we must immediately resort to prayer, exercise a similar tested certainty rooted entirely in God's attributes, and anticipate singing the same joyous hymn of praise.
Right. His example shows that if our hearts are aligned with God, he will demonstrate his strength on our behalf.
It's a remarkable lesson that the physical circumstances of our danger do not dictate the spiritual certainty of our deliverance.
Spurgeon concluded that the vigor of faith is the death of anxiety and the birth of security. And this brings us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener. Considering the swift and decisive fate of the Ziphims and David's capacity to achieve joyful singing while still in hiding, what does our own habitual prayer life, and specifically the use or avoidance of those Selah pauses within it, reveal about the speed with which we actually transition from paralyzing anxiety to covenant security, trusting God's veracity to fulfill both his promises to the righteous and his decisive sentence against malice?
Something to think about.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive. Thank you for tuning in to Reformed Thinking.